Rebecca Long-Bailey, Britain is in touching distance now of a deal. There's very warm messages coming out of Brussels and from Dublin. In those circumstances, if Boris Johnson brings back a deal to the House of Commons and therefore avoids the possibility of a no-deal Brexit, will Labour really try and vote that down?
Well, we'll wait and see what comes out of the negotiations, but reports that suggest so far that we don't think the Tories have moved too far on their deal. They won't be advocating for a customs union that will protect British manufacturing, and we're quite worried about the prospect of intense deregulation, particularly on standards such as food standards, workers' rights and environmental safeguards. But of course, when a deal comes back to Parliament, we'll assess that on its merits and then take appropriate action going forward.
Because Theresa May, after all, gave the Labour Party a lot of concessions on workers' rights, environmental rights, and many other things as well. You must now regret, as a party, walking away from that and voting that down, given where we are now.
Well, that's not true. There were a number of issues with the previous withdrawal agreement and political declaration, and of course I was involved in the intense negotiations with the government to try and get some form of compromise. And we did have, favourable noises in relation to workers' rights. They didn't go as far as we wanted them to, but it became clear in those negotiations that the Tories couldn't agree with themselves, let alone secure any confidence across Parliament, and it was clear that those negotiations were going to collapse and that most Tory MPs weren't going to support what the Prime Minister was going to put on the table. And it's sad that it came to that point, because now we're faced with an even worse situation between a no-deal Brexit and a damaging Brexit that could deregulate our entire economy.
And you're going to have to decide what to do. Now, as you know, there are at least 19 Labour MPs who are thinking quite seriously about voting with the government purely to stop a no-deal Brexit. If they do that, should they be punished by the Labour Party?
Well, on the basis of what's on the table so far, Boris Johnson's proposals are incredibly damaging for our economy. We'll wait and see what happens in the negotiations, and as I've said, we'll assess the deal on its merits when it finally comes before the House, if indeed it does come before the House. But if it is as it stands, then the deal on the table is incredibly damaging, and I don't understand or wouldn't urge any of our Labour MPs or indeed any MP across the House to support those measures. And equally, we have the Ben Act, which requires the Prime Minister to secure an extension in the event that he can't secure approval for a deal or a no-deal Brexit, so that future plans can be made to renegotiate a better deal with the European Union after a general election has taken place, for example.
That to be true, but nonetheless, there are these Labour MPs who think that no deal is so near and so worrying they're prepared to vote for Boris Johnson's deal if, as you say, it comes to the House of Commons. Should they have the whip withdrawn if they do that? Yes or no?
It's incredibly worrying, and I understand why many colleagues will feel, that they're faced with that decision. But what I'd say is that we do have a level of insurance in relation to the Ben Act if a deal doesn't pass through Parliament, or indeed it seems that Boris Johnson's veering towards no deal. He's legally bound to ask for an extension from the European Union in the event that he doesn't secure support for either of those options from Parliament. And in that situation, I think we would be faced with a general election where every party would go out and explain to their electorate what they would secure from the European Union going forward. But it's an incredibly difficult decision, but I wouldn't advocate any MP across Parliament to support a deal that could damage our living standards and the safety of our constituents. And I know that my colleagues wouldn't do that.
Okay, now you've just, as it were, fairly rehearsed Labour's position, which is have a general election, win a general election, renegotiate Brexit, and then have a referendum. But there are a lot of your senior colleagues, as you know, who think that time is so short and we are at the crunch point, and actually what we need is a referendum now. John McDonnell, the Deputy Leader, has talked about this, and many of the other colleagues. What is your view? Is there not a case for having a referendum now and getting the issue finally cleanly dealt with this autumn?
Well, of course, I think things are going to move very quickly this week, and my personal view is that we need to assess what's on the table early this week. Has Boris Johnson managed to secure a deal, and what are the merits of that deal? I think there needs to be an examination of the parliamentary arithmetic, whether there's enough support to add an amendment to...
If there was enough support, sorry to jump in, if there was enough support for a referendum, would Rebecca Long-Bailey support a referendum?
Well, I've been on a journey, I'll be honest, Andrew, in relation to a public vote or a referendum, if you like. At the start of all of this process, I was completely against a public vote. I thought it would be very divisive. However, after 3 years of drama and pantomime antics from the Tory government, and the fact that we're facing the prospect of a no deal, I think the only option that we've got now is to let the people decide. And that's what our party's position is. I know that many colleagues are of a similar opinion to me. They've been on a journey. They weren't in favour of a referendum to start off with, but now we realise that it has to be put before the people, any final deal, and they have to make the decision as to whether they're happy with that relevant deal or whether they want to remain in the European Union. Now, that's the case if we're in a general election and Labour renegotiates a deal. And equally, I think it should be the position if we're faced with a deal that's passed through the Commons by an unelected Tory Prime Minister that could potentially be damaging for our economy.
So you could attach a referendum, as it were, to Boris Johnson's deal and put it to the country then?
Yes, but as I say, it's hypothetical at this stage, and my view would be that we'd need to assess the merits of the deal if in fact there is a deal on the table.